Okay, welcome back to the Conjecture Institute Podcast. Today I have with me Eric Denton. Eric is a freelance writer and host of the Falsifiable Podcast, a show in which he explores both current events and evergreen topics in science, culture and politics through a Popperian lens, which is fairly unique in the podcasting world. He is currently working on a book that serves as a one-stop shop for anyone interested in epistemology in general and Popperian epistemology in particular. Eric, welcome to the Conjecture Institute Podcast.
Thank you, Brett. Yeah, it's good to be here and good to be speaking with you.
Yeah, good to speak to you as well. Good to meet you finally virtually through this medium, aside from the emails that we've exchanged. Where are you coming to us from? Tell us a little bit about where you are.
I am coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida, the deep south of the United States. And weirdly enough, Jacksonville, or the upper side of Florida, seems more deep south than the lower half of Florida. It's this weird phenomenon. But yeah, and it's really weird because I don't have many friends that know of Popper or anything like that in these parts. So it's kind of cool to have the internet to be able to talk to people that have similar interests of these things. So.
Yeah. Well, given you just brought up the Deep South, and when it comes to the Deep South, American culture obviously dominates the globe. So even here in Australia, we've got an impression of what Deep South in the US means. Now, it's filled with a lot of baggage, and I'm sure that a lot of it is not particularly flattering and is misconceived. So can you give me just your version of what the Deep South is, culturally or otherwise, and how it differs to the rest of the US?
Well, I mean, it has its unique parts, but for the most part, if you drive around Jacksonville, you will find it's mainly Republican. It's very Trump-oriented nowadays politically. You never see any bumper stickers that have anything to do with Democrats or liberals or anything like that. It's usually all of that kind of stuff. Aside from that, culturally, it's sort of, people pride like country music and sort of rednecky style stuff. And it's fine talking about that because I'm from South Georgia. And the town that I'm from is Bickley, Georgia, which is probably the smallest town you'll ever see. When you go to that town, it's literally like traveling back in time. It's literally exactly the same as when I left. There's a church across the street from my grandparents' house, and nothing has changed in the 40 years of my lifetime, as far as I can tell, and which is kind of cool. I think it's great. However, my point being is that there is like this culture of rural, Republican, conservative. All of that stuff is very. It's actually it's a stereotype, but it's actually a true stereotype for the most part. You do have people like I myself I don't label myself a conservative or anything, but and I actually would attribute that probably to a rejection of it just due to being raised around it a lot. And as a kid, we always tend to want to rebel against what we're raised around. So I sort of went the opposite way. And as time has gone on, I've sort of come back and I've just tried to battle with my own self as far as all that goes. But anyways, all of the stereotypes tend to be true as far as the South
goes. Really?
But on the other hand, though, I love it. So I'm not going to diss it. I think it's great, and I'm glad I'm from here. And Florida's a great place. So I wouldn't disparage it at all.
Yeah. Well, Florida to me, I was there recently myself, and it struck me that in many ways the comparison for an Australian is to Queensland or to northern Queensland, especially in terms of climate. I mean, I wouldn't be able to handle it because the humidity in the summer especially is inescapable. It's just so hot. I mean, if you're not avoiding the alligators wandering across the road, you've got to try and get out of the heat in some way. And even the shade usually isn't much relief, I found anyway.
Yeah, no, it's the humidity. It's very humid. It's not like Arizona style heat or west side of the United States heat. It's very wet and just muddy feeling.
Yeah. Thank goodness for air conditioning. So you say you're a freelance writer. Have you been doing that ever since, let's say, you left school? Is this your career basically, or has been hitherto, beginning a podcast?
No, not at all. I get no money. I've never made any money from any sort of creative endeavor. I've always been, I like creation or creating things. But as far as I can remember, I played music at one time and I got paid for that occasionally. But no. And I just started writing in 2020, really. And that was whenever everybody went in lockdown. I actually was furloughed from a job that I was at. I worked at a trucking company at the time. And due to the global shutdown of logistics, I was furloughed. And then in that little bit of time, I started writing. I started podcasting because I wanted an outlet, but I didn't really want to be on any sort of, I didn't want to be on Twitter at the time or anything like that, just because I feel like, for me personally, that stuff is so poisonous. And I talk to people all the time about it, and I've talked to even David Deutsch about it, and he said that he has a rationale for why he sticks on there, and I think that it works for whoever. But for me, I go on there and I feel like I just think, man, this world is insane, but then I go outside and everything's completely fine. So I don't know what the disparity there is. So anyway, so I started a podcast and I started writing. Then I started a Substack in like 2020, and I happened to be reading an article in some magazine at the time, a physical magazine. I think it was Harper's, actually. I was subscribing to Harper's, and there was an article for Substack, which was brand new. And they were like, this is going to be the new thing, whatever. And I immediately got on it. And sure enough, it actually, now it's become sort of a big thing. And I didn't realize it at the time. But so I started writing articles then, mainly focusing on Popperian stuff. And that was due to, having gotten into that about a decade before. So,
can you tell me that story? So, how did you first come across Karl Popper? I mean, my excuse is that I was studying this stuff at university, philosophy of science, philosophy broadly, and he was interesting to me by virtue of the fact he was omitted very largely from the philosophy of science course, which of course we know is an absolute travesty. And I found Karl Popper not through university study, therefore, but through the work of David Deutsch. So what was your story? How did you come across Popper of all philosophers? And you're outside the academic world.
Oh, yeah. I've never talked to anybody other than doing my podcast that's in the academic world. So, I got into it through Tom Hyde. You did an interview with him, and it was very similar. I was listening to Sam Harris's podcast. I came across Sam Harris because I was raised very religiously. Let me backtrack a bit so we can have sort of an arc here. So, I was raised religiously again in the Deep South, and I have no qualms about that. My upbringing was fantastic, other than the fact that I was raised in a Pentecostal church, which is very charismatic. People raise their hands. They talk about hell a lot. I believed in hell until I was probably about 20 years old. And I always hear people like Richard Dawkins and all, I dropped that belief whenever I was 12 or whatever. I'm like, how? I was terrified to try to drop that belief, even if I had trouble, reconciling it with reality. But psychologically, I wrestled with it. Anyway, so I got into reading books to try to dissuade myself from that. I watched YouTube videos of debates between Christians and atheists, and one of those atheists was Richard Dawkins. I got into reading Dawkins, and another was Sam Harris and Hitchens and the Four Horsemen, Daniel Dennett. And I read all these Christian apologetics. I read all of their books. I just was, at the end of the day, persuaded by the atheist side of that faction. And so whenever Sam Harris started his podcast, I was fascinated with it because I'd read his books. I think I'd read every book that he put out, which was 2 or 3 at the time. And lo and behold, David Deutsch was one of his guests. And I had never heard anybody talk like David Deutsch. I mean, he was I listened to that episode maybe 10 times, which is crazy because I've never listened to any episode of a podcast all the way through, let alone several times. But David Deutsch was saying something that resonated with me, and it seemed true and yet extremely counterintuitive. And it was so completely devoid of emotion. He was just saying things like, he was talking about how common sense is not... we have theories that are truer than common sense and all of this kind of stuff, and this just was boggling my mind. But the reason I think it resonated with me, because at the time you had people like atheists that were trying to have a certain view of the world, which was there is no God and this is why ... It's not necessarily like that, but not that black and white, but that's the way it was kind of framing. And then David Deutsch was like, well, we can't be certain about anything within science. And then he had this explanation as to why that is. You can't prove anything in science. You can prove things in like logic and math and all this kind of stuff. And I was just utterly amazed with those arguments and persuaded by it. And I just liked the anti-dogmatism of the whole endeavor at first. And then I went on to reading his other book, or read Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch, and then I backtracked and read Fabric of Reality, which led me into reading almost every Karl Popper book so far, and people like David Miller and all these other philosophers. So just within the last decade, I've just gotten heavily into Popperian epistemology. I've listened to your podcast, and yeah, so it's one of those things. It's not an uncommon story, but that's how I got there.
That's fascinating. Yeah, Sam Harris has been a gateway for many people to David Deutsch, which I think is a fantastic thing. You know, I've disagreed with Sam about, you know, particular areas of rationality, epistemology. You know, the AI doom in particular lately is one thing where I've got disagreements with him. But I do remember, you know, back in 2002-3 when The End of Faith was published, and I thought that his style of writing was just another level. It was beautiful in its clarity, and at the time I was persuaded by, I think, just about everything in the book. It wasn't until, you know, much later, because I was, like you, I wasn't Pentecostal, I was Catholic, and so I'd been raised to believe in God. It made sense to me up until about the age of 18 that, well, you know, the universe has to come from somewhere, so I was one of these sort of people who relied upon the unmoved mover kind of argument for God. I thought, yeah, that makes sense, you know, Jesus was a real historic figure, and so on and so forth. But reading Harris, you know, his first pass version of rationality completely took out from under me any faith that I might have had about religion. So, his focus, I found in retrospect, was kind of narrow. It wasn't really by beginning with the epistemology or the understanding of what knowledge is and that kind of thing, but rather he was just saying, look, there's basically no evidence for this thing, which was also like Dawkins' argument, you know, there's no evidence and so on and so forth. But now, I don't know if you're like me, but I'm not a believer still. I would still regard myself as an atheist. But because of the way in which Deutsch talks about inexplicit knowledge, I think that religion has an important role to serve in maintaining the stability of a civilization over time. We can fly free of it, and I think it's important for people to give up superstitious ideas when they can, when they've got somewhere better to jump to, as David likes to say. But simply giving up on religion, especially for young people, without having anywhere else to go, except in this day and age they seem to be turning to politics and that kind of thing, and activism and so on and so forth, because they haven't been given a better option. So the flip side to that new atheism was a kind of nihilism. No one, Sam's fantastic, I really like Sam, but he wasn't offering anything to a person and saying, here's the alternative kind of thing, where I think with like David Deutsch's worldview, there is an alternative. There's actually something inspiring. It's a better story we can tell about our cosmic place in the universe and all those wonderful things about religion. I don't know, what are your thoughts more broadly about the slow erosion of religion in especially Western culture at the moment, and the concomitant rise, I think, of something like woke?
Yeah, I think it is true to say that that's what's happening. Popper actually says in one of his books, I think it's actually The Myth of the Framework, and he might say it in some other books, but he's an admirer of, or he actually he understands the importance of tradition, and I do too, and I'm like you, I sort of see tradition as something that's actually important in societies, and one of those traditions is religion. The problem with religion, obviously, is it comes with a lot of baggage, like superstitious baggage and all this kind of stuff, and then that creates tribalism and all. But then again, politics does too. But yeah, so I see the importance of that, and as you've said, we do see a rise with the reduction of religion in society. We see a rise of people being heavily involved in politics, and they tend to be younger people. Therefore, they're more passionate. Therefore, they go for more radical versions of politics. And I feel like all of us are like that. Well, not all of us. That's an extrapolation, and that's sort of an inductive argument. But like, I find for myself, it was like that at the very beginning. Whenever I rejected conservatism and stuff like that, I was heavily on the left. And then I started noticing all of the discrepancies with, socialism and all. I was never a socialist or anything, but like I started noticing all of these problems, and therefore I was luckily persuaded out of all of those sort of bad ideas. But we see that now with what's going on online. You just see extreme ideas, whether it's right or left, and usually it's people that have left religion, and they're trying to find something to glom onto where they can have some sort of communal effect, some sort of tribalism, where they can say, this is my team, that's their team. And yeah, it's kind of sad. And again, like, it doesn't have to be that way. We can, speaking of Karl Popper again, if you read books like The Myth of the Framework, he actually dispels this whole thing, which, who was it? Plato had this idea that if we have different worldviews, we simply can't speak, and you shouldn't even try to speak. And Popper does away with that, and he says, no, we actually should speak to each other, even if we come to no agreement, even if there's nothing that's, gained as far as like any of that goes. There is something gained, which is like this John Stuart Mill style thing where you first of all understand yourself better, you understand them better, and you've also not killed each other because you've just spoken. You know what I mean? So there is that. But yeah, back to your question, I'm sad as to see what's going on right now with all that stuff. I will say this though, I think that with Sam Harris, I have a little bit of a different take on that, though. I think that he actually did offer something, which was spiritualism, and he wrote that book, Waking Up. I actually found that pretty compelling. I myself was I went through AA many years ago. Are you familiar with that, Brett? Alcoholics Anonymous? Yeah. So I haven't drank since 2008, and it's I don't clap or whatever for it, but like AA was actually extremely helpful to me at the time. And whenever I was going through stuff, I found that what Harris was offering, even in the End of Faith, he offers in the end of his book, he kind of talks about Buddhism and non-dualism and all this kind of stuff. I actually was kind of interested in that, and it sort of helped me through a lot of things. I think there is something there. It has nothing to do with supernatural things or anything, but it does have to do with the brain and understanding oneself and understanding when you're getting lost in thought and all that kind of stuff. And I myself meditate, and I like to meditate. And but so I do think of all of the new atheists, I do think that he did offer something, and he understood, and he acknowledged that religious people did have something that they were getting out of stuff. Like, he noticed that they were getting these feels that you can't describe. Like, they'll be like, oh, I felt Jesus and I felt the Spirit. And he was able to wring out the absurdity of that and keep the actual awe of it, I felt like, with some of his notions. And that comes from like Buddhism and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, so that would be the only thing I would say about that. But to your question though, I'm hoping that people get back into discussing things, which as of right now, I was reading the news today, and you have a shooting that just took place on some people like ICE informants here in the United States, and yet again we have, somebody shooting somebody because they disagree with what, something, whereas we should be debating these.
Yeah, I think that, and returning to your point about these supposed incommensurate frameworks which would prevent people from speaking to each other, the fact is that, people are searching for meaning, and when they lose meaning and they enter into a kind of nihilistic worldview where they think that people aren't important at all for whatever reason, then that leads to danger. That leads to the place where people are unwilling to speak or think there's nothing worth living for. And so we've already talked about how, for example, some young people will replace religion, the idea of heaven and trying to save yourself for some life that exists afterwards. They can replace that with, there is no life afterwards, but I'm going to save the planet. And so they turn a kind of anti-human pessimism into the reason for living. Their life now has meaning because they're going to save the whole world kind of thing. And what I think Deutsch's worldview does is it bridges the gap between that young, passionate person who wants to do something grand with their life. Of course, they're thinking to themselves, what I'm going to do that's grand with my life is save the planet and save the whales and save all of this other stuff. And on the other hand, the religious person is going, I'm going to save myself in order to safeguard a place in heaven in the future, that because the human life is so important. I think Deutsch has this kind of wonderful way of being able to see you yourself are really crucially important, and you have cosmic significance that can have these outsized effects on all of physical reality. And so it sort of straddles both the good bits in religion, namely people are really super important, and the young activist who wants to really make a difference, even if you're not thinking that's what's going to happen. That's part of the philosophy, that every person has the potential to actually change the world in some grand way. They may not, but the potential is there.
Right. Yeah, I like how you're right. Yeah, Deutsch made it whenever he got past anthropomorphism and he did away with all these kind of things. He introduced something which was interesting, which is like you said, like people that drop religion tend to be down on humans all of a sudden, where they're like, we're the problem. We're like the parasites of this planet. And Deutsch he was like one of the first people. I mean, actually, I would argue, for me, he was the first person I heard arguing in the opposite direction, where he was like, we're actually very important. We're the only species that cares about other species on this planet. We're the only ones that can break out of our Darwinian, kill everything so we can survive. And also we're the only ones that can potentially get life, including animals that are on this planet, on other planets. So due to knowledge creation, knowledge growth, and all that stuff, we have the potential. We don't know if it'll happen or not, but I mean, whenever I heard him flip that changed my whole perspective about things. It was very optimistic, and it's not a naive optimism. Steven Pinker is really good about talking about optimism, and I think that he says it's not a half glass full type of optimism. It's just the idea that we as humans are important. Steven Pinker doesn't put it this way, Deutsch does, but Pinker adds like a nice background to this. We as humans actually have significance in the universe, and to our knowledge, so far, we're the only creatures in the universe that can do these sorts of things. We can control. We flipped everything, where big things now have less significance than small things. So we're small, and yet we can utilize the power of the sun, which is huge, and it doesn't go backwards like that. The sun can't utilize us. You know what I mean? So it's this weird thing that we've done, and I would have never thought like this if I didn't come across Deutsch and how he explains things. I will say this, though, as I'm talking right now, and I don't know if you've ever thought like this, but one thing about Deutsch and Popper and all these kinds of people is I have to realize that they too are human. and anytime I read somebody and I find their ideas extremely convincing and extremely interesting, I still should be searching for what's wrong with it. And that actually comes from their teaching. And even with Popper, you can read his work and find many things that are wrong with it. But the overall and Deutsch, whenever, like, I don't agree with Deutsch, maybe politically across the board, but I agree with his overall sentiment. And so again, it's like I need to. I guess my point with this little caveat is saying that I always need to make sure I realize that everybody's fallible, including the very creative and smart among us. And just always keep that in mind whenever I'm thinking about these people and ideas.
Yeah, people challenge me very frequently. It seems like every other conversation I have about my passion for these ideas, for the books that David has written, or Popper's epistemology and so on and so forth, is they think it's an own, or they think they've defeated me in some way by challenging me to tell me all the ways in which I disagree, because after all, you're a critical rationalist, you have to disagree, and unless I can enumerate at that point in time this list of substantive disagreements, then somehow my credibility on talking about Deutsch as an independent interlocutor is completely lost. But the thing is that it's been decades now of me sort of writing about these things, talking about these things, talking to David, talking to other fans of David, trying to figure out where David could be wrong, and it's only through that kind of investigation. And by the way, if someone has a feeling, like I've had the feeling sometimes that things that I've read in David's work or things that I've heard him say, I have the feeling that it's wrong in some way. But again, as Popper would point out, simply saying that's wrong or I don't like that or whatever is not an argument. You need an alternative explanation to jump to that's better than the one you're being offered. And that's where I fail, because the explanations that David offers, I tend not to find flaw with them, even if at times I might think that can't be right. Well, it may feel like it can't be right to me, but unless I'm able to actually say, well, here's the better theory that I'm going to actually live my life by, then it's the only rational thing I can do is to say that's the best that I've heard. I mean, I might not like it, you might not like it, but if the truth is that we're, for example, guessing our way to ever better explanations, then unless someone can explain that we're not actually conjecturing, that it's not actually a guess, that it's not always possible to be wrong, then I'm going to stick with that until such time as someone gives me something better, because that's the fallibilist position isn't saying everything is wrong, it's saying everything could be wrong, but I'm going to live by the best misconceptions I have until someone figures out an error in them and improves it in some way.
No, and I think you're right, because so my whole thing right now is trying to explicitly connect Popper with Darwin, and Popper did this already, and he does it in Myth of the Framework. He does it in obviously Evolution, Objective Knowledge, which is the whole book kind of has a through line of Darwinism in it. But I think that within Darwinism, you have creatures that they tend to be pretty good so far, like from the very beginning of this planet, and they've remained the same, some of these bacterial style creatures, and there is no evolution really happening within them, maybe micro bits or whatever, but that's kind of what you're talking about right now. Those things have found a pretty good way of living, and it's been working. And as far as Popper and Deutsch go, or in particular Deutsch, he's landed on some explanations that are so strong. Actually, I should refrain from using the word strong. They're just good. By the way, the caveat I just did there about the strong, for anybody who's not a Popperian, there is no stronger, strong. They're just good. So if an explanation works, it works, and we don't have to add anything to that. But David has done this thing where he's landed on some great explanations, good explanations. And as you said, I look for them myself. I try to find flaws, and thus far they've just remained steady. And until somebody offers something new that's potentially better, and including Darwinism, if somebody offered something better, then I'm all for it. I will be suspicious of it for sure, because Darwinism just is so, neo-Darwinism in particular, is so strong. But if it's better and it defeats Darwinism, neo-Darwinism, then I would, due to how the teaching of Popper and Deutsch, I would relinquish my views on neo-Darwinism as it stands and go with the new thing and just see where it takes us. And I imagine that neo-Darwinism will be an approximation to this other thing that just was created. So that's usually how it goes.
Yeah, I suppose in one sense. Yeah. In one sense, we know that has to be the case, because even though we know a lot about the evolution of species over time and the diversity of species and that kind of thing, we know it can't possibly be complete, because there are many questions we have that we don't have answers to, and so some future version of neo-Darwinism supposedly might be able to answer them. And you mentioned the bacteria. I think archaea are one of the most interesting domains of creatures that are out there. They're the more primitive forms of bacteria. They tend to live in hot environments, so they're thermophilic bacteria, live deep under the ground, and many of the studies into the origin of life seem to be pointing to the fact that life early on was thermophilic. So the very first bacteria that were out there were these heat-loving bacteria, because the early Earth, of course, was a lot hotter than what it is today. It used to be, the surface of the Earth might have been very close to the boiling point of water almost for a while there. But that's precisely when life first arose. And those same species of archaea or bacteria have existed right through to today. And I think David's pointed out on more than one occasion, it's like, this is a mystery. It's a mystery because for about 2 billion years or something, evolution by natural selection apparently wasn't doing anything. There was no mutation going on. So yeah, you're really interested in this area of I suppose it's a version of knowledge creation, the creation of genes, which then persist through time, and so it's not explanatory knowledge, but it's knowledge of that kind. What fascinates you about this Darwinian picture of how life has arisen and how species evolve over time?
I always try to look, and I'm going to sound like a Platonic essentialist whenever I say this. I'm trying to find the bedrock of something, and we Popperians have to dissuade ourselves of that. We just got to start where we are. And in Darwinism, that's what it does. You start where you're at. You start with whatever traditions you have, whatever science there is, and whatever theories there are, and then you try to make sense of the world with those theories. And if they're not working, they will get superseded. I think that for me, my fascination from this came from that. They're searching what is Popper's ultimate thing here, which is, I think, my thought on it is that every Popperian is a Darwinian and every Darwinian is a Popperian, whether you like it or not. I mean, you could reject Popper, you could reject but you're that regardless. Even if you think you're an inductivist, which I don't think people actively think that way. Maybe they do. They did at one time. Actually, they really did at one time. That was the whole thing. I mean, you read Bacon or Locke or any of these people, these are flat out inductivists. This is how it works. And Hume came along and said the problem there, and then we've been dealing with this problem ever since, basically pretending as if induction does work even though we know it doesn't.
Just as an aside on that, I don't want to interrupt your flow, but it's interesting you talk about, that people like Bacon who were, hardcore inductivists. It is on the resurgence now, this whole AI thing. You listen to the way some of these technical people talk, and they just think, well, the way in which you get new physical theories is you just collect the data and you extrapolate, and that gives you the new law of physics. So I thought we won this argument a long time, but apparently we didn't. But of course, this is why philosophy is important. Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt your flow there.
So to put a point on what I was saying, and then I want to talk about that. I think that I want to make it. My goal is I'm writing a book right now, and it's taking forever. I just work a day job. I work like 60 hours a week in the day. So whenever I do research or anything, it's usually listening to a book. I do a lot of reading at night. Like I've been reading Wittgenstein's Poker. Have you read this book?
I have. I've got a podcast episode all about that book and the encounter. Yeah.
Oh, man,
great book. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, David Edmonds did a great job, and John Edenau, however you say it. Anyway, so I do a lot of reading and all that kind of stuff. But so it's taken forever to do this. But my whole goal with this is just to basically explain that whether you like it or not, this is what's happening. You're not there. There is no induction. This is a true myth. I mean, it is a true illusion. It feels that way. Whenever you look at, whenever people see something, they think they're extrapolating. For instance, like you see, you see the sun. The Earth is circling the sun. Therefore, you think there's a gravitational force, and in your mind's eye, you're thinking this is like a string that's holding these things together. But already right there's no induction happening. You're forming a theory in your head. You're not seeing anything and you're not extrapolating anything. But people tend to think that this is what's going on when it never happens. It never happens. So I think we should always get away from the idea of like trying to, we should definitely get away from the idea of trying to extrapolate things. For instance, like if actually this is I've been thinking about this lately. I want to hear what you say about this actually, and I'll test this on you, and you might have pushback. So I've been thinking about anarchy lately, and anarchism is this idea that's I think is very fashionable nowadays, and it's similar to libertarianism. So again, like in the Popperian sphere, I think there's a lot of libertarians. This is something I've noticed at least, and I think it's interesting because I myself am not a libertarian. Popper wouldn't have been a libertarian either, I don't think, or he certainly wasn't, even though he was friends with people like F.A. Hayek and all this kind of stuff. But like whenever you hear a libertarian talk, there's some induction happening. For instance, David Graeber, I saw an interview with him. He's a famous anarchist. And he was like, yeah, so I lived in some tribe for a little while in this like little area, and I just noticed everything worked properly. It was just like, everything worked, and there was no government, there was no this, there was no that. It could easily work for everybody. And again, he's using a form of induction there. Induction is not happening because you don't see that. You don't see the unseen. However, it's an inductive reasoning that he's doing. Like, if we just build this out, it'll work for everybody. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, it might work for that little small community because A, they all have the same tradition. They're small in number, just like if you're family or whatever, you can do this with your family too. Of course it's all going to work. You don't need anything. But the moment you get outside of that and you get around people that don't have your traditions and don't have this, now you've got some issues that you're going to have to deal with. So I think that, I've been thinking about this lately because I'm reading Robert Nozick's book, whatever it is, Anarchy, State, and Utopia, and I'm trying to refute or dispel the idea of anarchism with an epistemological argument. I don't know if I'm succeeding so far, but what do you think about that, Brett? As far as what I'm testing it for just a moment.
Yeah, some people come at these political debates based upon some kind of principle that they think is just the super important thing that they need to preserve above all else. And so I think when it comes to the libertarians, it's liberty or it's freedom, or the anarchists, it's something like non-coercion, which, you know, many of us are on the side of. But they're committed to that over and above everything else, whereas I'm not. I don't think that there's a single thing that I'm going to defend in that way. What I look around the world at and see is some societies succeeding, and I want an explanation as to why, and some societies that are failing, and I want to understand why. And so you could almost put that in terms of progress, you know, where is the most rapid, good progress happening and where isn't it happening? And so you want to tend in the direction of the society where you've got progress and understand why the progress is happening there at the rate it is, to the extent that you can come up with a good explanation about that. Because it's no good saying, well, it must just be a complete and utter lack of coercion, so let's get rid of all government institutions and now turn everything over to private industry, and then we'll have the ideal society of maximum progress. Well, I don't think that's true. I think that, yes, where you tend in the direction of less coercion, South Korea, you're going to get faster progress than where you have lots and lots of coercion like North Korea. So we know that there's a difference there, but there's no point, but that's just to say there are institutions in both places that either stifle progress or enable progress. And so I come from the perspective of, yeah, it's not ideal that we have force and coercion in government and we have authority and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know what the idea would be, but it can't be simply give up the very institutions that have thus far allowed for the most rapid progress and rapid industrialization, knowledge creation, all that great stuff that basically began, you know, in Britain and then spread out throughout the West and the Anglosphere and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I kind of also I'm reminded of when Ayn Rand, she wrote the book Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. And by ideal, she really did mean ideal. So this is the ideal thing. But we can't just implement it overnight kind of thing. We have to figure out how to slowly undo that. It's incrementalism, right? So we know what we kind of want to work towards. And so that would be my ideas about libertarianism and anarchy and that kind of thing. From an epistemological point of view, it's like, how do we ensure that knowledge creation continues and at an ever better rate, but it can't be revolution. It just has to be incrementally. Let's try and change this institution. Did that work? Okay, let's try something else. And so, hence, democracy is just so important for being able to be a laboratory of policies and ideas, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I think actually I completely agree with everything you just said there. I think that it's yeah, I think that, I guess my point with even saying this, or maybe even approaching it this way, is that, again, Deutsch and Popper got me into thinking about things at this other level, which is epistemological, rather than I start there and then I can build up from there and see where we're at. But this idea of looking at things epistemologically and stuff has just really captured me in a way that's interesting. And by the way, I did it sort of an inductive thing a moment ago where I said I've noticed that most Popperians are libertarians. In my sphere, they seem to be that way. Now, there could be a ton of, there could be leftist Popperians. I don't know. But
there are. They absolutely are. We'll look at it. It's communist Popperians, sort of phenomenally.
George Soros is a good example.
There you go.
You pointed something out the other day that I looked at. I don't use X, but I looked at in preparation to this. I just looked at what people were saying, and you had pointed out somebody needs to. Basically, that George Soros doesn't understand the open society, and as far as I can see, I completely agree with you. And what's funny about that is that he actually wrote the foreword to one of the open societies. So I'm like, what is this? And the problem is people. I saw a YouTube video not long ago where they were connecting Popper heavily with Soros, and Soros was a student of Popper, actually, in real life. I mean, they knew each other. But again, I'm like, the thing about Popper is he was not explicit. He was not political in that sense. His whole approach was very broad, and it was a background approach. And he was looking at the very deep structure of things. He never mentions you can be anything well. I actually think that communism obviously wouldn't work in Popper's world. You're being irrational if you're doing that. But you can be pretty much anything on the spectrum and still adopt his ideas to a degree. But yeah, whenever I saw that George Soros is he has all these really leftist ideas, I'm just thinking, wow, that doesn't really flow with the open society, as far as I can tell. The open society that was explained in The Open Society and Its Enemies.
Yeah, I was over in your great country earlier on in the year for a conference, and I got the opportunity to speak to a whole bunch of different people, and it was phenomenal to me just how many people had a very bad idea about what Popper was, precisely because they knew Popper had written the book The Open Society and Its Enemies, and they knew also that George Soros had this thing, The Open Society, and so they just married the two up and went, well, guilt by association, and trying to explain to them, look, it doesn't matter. Soros might actually even be a highly intellectual guy who might be able to, rail off chapter and verse, in The Open Society and Its Enemies, and be able to pick and choose quotes where he thinks that it's going to support his, I would say, funding of a certain kind of anarchy, funding of a certain kind of fascism in many ways, all of the things that Popper would stand for. And so, yeah, it's an unfortunate... It's not a coincidence. It's an unfortunate mangling of this term, the open society. And I more talk about anyway, as Deutsch does, dynamic and static. I think that is actually a deeper, more useful, epistemologically sound kind of way of getting at this. And Popper was really talking about, and quite rightly, a man of his time, trying to contrast places that, fascist Germany or, Soviet Russia kind of thing with more open society. And at that time, when he was writing, it was a very real threat that these more closed societies were going to take over. So that's one thing. He's a product of his time, but people do try and paint Popper as being this uber libertarian, but of course we know he wasn't. He thought that, for example, among other things, the welfare state had a role to play, which is something quite different to what certain other members of the Popperian community might think, for example. But it's kind of good to have diversity within the Popperian community. You do have a whole bunch of people who are often at each other's necks about what the best way to view politics is. Yeah, the other thing I was going to say on the open society is, again, very few people have actually even read the book. So, as I say, guilt by association, And I think that what people think, who haven't read Popper, think the open society means is something like open borders, especially at the moment. And people quite rightly, they honestly think, and I think maybe, I don't know, I haven't read exactly what Soros has said on this, but I think he has this sort of idea as well, that we need a one world global government kind of thing, and then just everyone's free to move from one place to another because all cultures are equal, that kind of thing or whatever. So I think that is a true criticism of that idea of the open society. It is that, we need to have nation states. We have to recognise there's genuine, evil out there in the world, or, worse cultures and that kind of thing. But that's not what Popperians mean by open society. They mean open to ideas, but not so open that you start to tolerate the intolerant and all that sort of stuff.
Right. Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And that's a good way to say it. I mean, what you just said is so funny, because I've thought about this so many times. People hear the word open society and they literally think, oh, so you're for illegal immigration. And I'm like, no, that's not at all. It has nothing to do with immigration. This book is it's heavily, first of all, it's a if you're not well versed in philosophy, it's going to be a slog. I mean, I've read Open Society several times now, and but it's a slog for anybody who's not versed on Plato, Heraclitus, Aristotle, Hegel. I mean, Hegel, yeah, and he uses Arthur Schopenhauer to punch Hegel left and right in the book, and honestly, I've actually gotten schooled by Jeremy Shearmer, who was Popper's assistant for 8 years at one point, and that guy knows a lot about it. And he corrected me on a couple things as far as the open society goes. He was he'd be very skeptical of any of the parts about Hegel, and he was like, because Popper was he was writing the book obviously in a very quick fashion, and he was doing his own interpreting. And literal interpretation, like the language and all. He didn't have the relevant books in front of him, so he was, really doing this. So he said, be very skeptical of those Hegel moments, because he wasn't really good on Hegel. And so that leads me, so again, Popper's fallible, and that's not to say that Hegel's right about it. I still think he's probably somebody I wouldn't follow, but ultimately, but yeah. So, let me say this, Brett. I was going to say, just to put this out there. So again, so my life, though, interestingly, I've always just worked, just so people can hear this and it might be of interest. I've never been in academia. I've never worked around academia. I actually left original high school in 10th grade. I did this other alternate thing. I ended up getting a diploma. I did a little bit of community college, and this was just trying to get a regular job, which that never happened. I I was a railroad conductor for many, many years, and then I've worked in a warehouse for the past several years. I have no professional affiliation with anything. So the fascinating thing that happened is that I do this podcast, and again, it's just a hobby. I make no money. It has, it has some sort of, for me, it's just fun. And then I get an email one day randomly from Logan Chipkin, who's the president of the Conjecture Institute. I've never heard of this. Obviously, I know Conjecture. I'm like, oh, well, that sounds interesting. This must be Popperian, and of course it is. And it's the idea of spreading critical rationalism, which that's my whole idea on the podcast, was like trying to put critical rationalism out in the world. I actually thought that I didn't know what to make of Logan at first, because he said, hey, man, you want to be a fellow of this institution? I was like, I immediately was like, oh, I don't know what, I have no background or whatever. And he goes, just call me. So I called him, and I was at work one day, and I called him, and I And he was just like, yeah, because we want you to be a fellow, and we'll help you along the way and all this kind of stuff. Put your stuff out there. We like what you're doing. Essentially, he just wanted to fund, or not fund because I don't get funded, but like he wanted to he wanted to promote my work. And I was just like, I was dumbfounded with this because I was like, why? Like, who are you people? But what it is like it's this organization, nonprofit organization that is promoting work that they find interesting, and they're getting away from academia in the sense that I told him, I was like, listen, I don't have credentials. I'm not a physicist. I noticed you have a lot of physicists and mathematicians. I'm not. He was like, no, we don't care about that. We just like what you do. We want you to just keep doing what you do. And I was just like, what does that even mean? I was so, what? And again, this is their whole philosophy, which is the Conjecture Institute is completely non-coercive in a way that I'm not used to. I'm used to somebody saying, do this for this. They said, just do whatever you want and thumbs up. You know what I mean? It's like, as long as you're trying to put out critical rationalism. They didn't even say that. They didn't say anything. They just said, we like what you're doing. Just keep doing it. And I was just like, okay. So anyways, all that to say that the reason you and I are even talking right now is because of that. It was just this interesting thing that happened. And Logan heard that I was trying to write a book, which is an arduous process for me. I'm not an author. I do write. I write on Substack. And I've written some things I'm really proud of. But ultimately, yeah, I was just thought to myself one day, I was like, you know what? I read a lot of books. That's all I do with, my spare time nowadays is like, let me just write one. Let me write one that I don't see in the marketplace. And so I landed on this idea of Darwin and Popper. And so, yeah, so this is how I got here in this very conversation, which is it's so interesting because it's so weird. Ultimately, it's just so not like, it's very odd, but it's cool that it happened. That's all I'll say, as far as all that goes.
Yeah, for a long time, I went through the traditional ways in which people kind of get into philosophy and physics and stuff. And so my life was extremely regimented. So when I went to university, not only was I going to university, go to lectures and then tutorials and labs and stuff. And so you have a timetable you've got to adhere to. But then after university, I'd go off and do an after university job, whereas a security guard, which was very regimented and, you follow a timetable and all this sort of stuff. So it's rules upon rules upon rules. And then when I got out into the workforce, the job I had for most of my life was school teacher. And so again, back to timetables, back to rules and everything. And so when I left that, it was a combination of both being liberated and suddenly I can be creative and just do whatever I want. But on the flip side, it's hard to put into words how I didn't know how to do just whatever I wanted. It was like, I need a timetable. I need someone to give me structure. I couldn't figure it. So it took time to actually figure out how you yourself can be productive while not being in the constraints of the culture that you've existed in for so long. Because for me, I literally went from, a little kid at school to university and then back to school as a teacher. And it's like my entire life has been timetabled, following alarms and going to sleep at a particular time and getting up at a certain time. And so it was a huge mind shift. And so I've only been doing this for about 5 years or something at this point, but it is very different and very hard to communicate to other people. And sometimes I feel quite guilty as well at the same time, because I think I've got I'm in a very privileged position of having a level of freedom that I know that many people don't enjoy. But if you can get it, if you can get any amount of that, your creativity and productivity obviously goes up, which is, I hope, what you're finding. Can you tell me a little bit more? We'll talk about the book in a minute, but a little bit more about the Falsifiable Podcast, what your aims are, who you've had on so far, what are some of the interesting conversations you've had?
Yeah, so whenever I started the Falsifiable Podcast, I did a couple iterations of it originally, and I originally started doing like these, I would write them out. It would be like 15-minute episodes about topics that I thought were interesting, and it was very like kind of like flat and whatever. And but I thought it was interesting and got my thoughts together. But then I just decided, I'm going to get guests. Let me see if I can get guests. And I emailed randomly Lawrence Krauss, who's, everybody knows Lawrence Krauss, the physicist, cold email. I found his email address. I didn't even know if it was his email address, and sure enough, it was. And he said, "Sure." I said, "Would you want to do the podcast? This is my aim. I'm a Popperian. I like the ... And he said, "Sure, I'll do it." And I was just like, "What?" And so I was sort of dumbfounded with that. But he came on, and I've actually done a podcast with him like 4 times now. I got Michael Shermer and Jeremy Shearmer. I've had some really. Oh man, I had Robert Hazen, David, of course, yeah, Robert Hazen recently. David, by the way, let me tell the story about this, because I emailed David Deutsch for about 3 years. I would email him about every 6 months, asking him, "Do you want to come on this podcast?" And I wanted the podcast name alone to attract him, and he was not biting for 3 years. He was just like, "Yeah, I'm busy, But David's extremely sweet because he answers your emails. David's one of the kinder people I've come across, and he's just generous with his time. But and he answers questions that I have sometimes. But I emailed him finally after like 3 years of doing this. I get an email one day randomly, or no, I emailed him, and I was at work. I was at lunch, taking a lunch break, and he emailed me and he says, "Yeah, I'll do it. You want to do it in 30 minutes?" I was like, "Oh crap, I'm at work." And I said, "Oh, screw it." I said, "Sure." So I went home. I was on a forklift. I ran home to my house. I got my stuff set up. I emailed David the link. Then we had a conversation, and then I went right back to work. So I had a deep conversation about epistemology and physics and all, and then I go right back to work. And yeah, so it's just, that's how my whole thing has been. But it's just basically trying to create documents for people that they can come to or come back to, and not unlike yourself, actually. Although yours, I would say, are extremely, mine are not deep like that. They're not like, they're more, what's the word, colloquial or yeah. And but hopefully people can get something from it, and it's sort of an entry gate into this world is what I want. And really that's the aim, though, is just to have good conversations with great thinkers, and also people I disagree with, which I've had in my time. I've only had one conversation that I had a massive disagreement with, and that one I actually never put up. And it's not because of free speech or something like that. It's like, folks, I have a job, and like I can't. I don't get paid for this. And it went completely south, and it was over Palestine, Israel, and I'm a supporter of Israel. And I had somebody on the opposite end of that, and it was just complete catastrophe of a conversation. And that was the only one that I haven't released, actually. So, and I deleted it. I just told him, I was like, it's deleted. It's done, So.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, when again, I feel like I'm name dropping the United States, but again, when I was over there recently, I was in California, and it was a conference, and I was there with Reed Nicewander. But anyway, he's saying, "Who do you want to talk to?" And I did a podcast with Michael Shermer as well. I did one with Brett Weinstein, and also this fellow who I think he's sort of a libertarian type person, but that wasn't why we were talking. The reason why Reed put us in a room together and had us talk was because he was a Jewish fellow, but he was set against Israel. He was very against Israel and the Israel-Palestine conflict, and I'm an Israel supporter as well. And so we sat down together for a good hour and a half or something, and it was a very animated debate, but we left with, we actually had a hug at the end and said, nice to meet you. And he was a very pleasant guy. I disagreed with him completely. And, this was just at the time, by the way, where Iran was firing off a bunch of rockets into Tel Aviv. And so anyway, that hasn't been released yet because it was quite a few months ago now, but that's probably the most thwart conversation I've ever had. But even then, I still managed to find, time to smile and that kind of thing. And I've never found myself. I've always wondered what I'd be like on a Piers. I don't know. You watch Piers Morgan, that Piers Morgan Uncensored, with like Cenk Uygur. I wonder how I'd go then. I'd probably just sit there and smile.
They're like, "You idiot!" Literally, they like cuss each other out and stuff.
I know.
No, but in that sense, that was a situation though where I actually was trying to do the "I may be right, you may be wrong, and by an effort we may get nearer to the truth." This is the whole idea of critical rationalism. It's that aphorism, by the way, for anybody who doesn't know, comes from Karl Popper, and you can find it in several of his books, but mainly in The Myth of the Framework, and it's in the essay, The Myth of the Framework. But so I may be right, or no, you may be right, I may be wrong, and by an effort we may get nearer to the truth. To me, this is something that is so vital for conversations. It's the only way that you can have goodwill going into things. But honestly, we are humans too. And in that conversation that I had with that guy, my emotions got hot, his got hot. And I found that it was just, at the end of it, I just said, hey man, let's just stop, because I actually like you, and I think you like me as a person. But if we release this literally looks like we detest one another. And he's a radical. This was a leftist, and I know, like, I'm not friends with. I guess I'm friendly with him, but like I don't really have leftist friends other than that. And I found it actually extremely much harder than I thought it was going to be to talk with him about it. And on that note, that's what's sad about the far left right now, is that I actually have talked with, on my podcast. I do have a friend that's a hard right MAGA guy, and we get along just plain great. We disagree on literally everything. But the thing about him is he allows the conversation to flow, and I do, and it's just kind of nice. But there's something, that's the hard thing about sometimes doing these podcasts, and this, you don't have control. You're whatever your interlocutor's doing, man. It's and again, like, since I don't get paid to do it, I'm like, well, I don't want my job to see this and be like, what is he up to? If I got paid for this and this was my thing, then by all means, I'll become Piers Morgan in that regard. I wouldn't want that. But what I'm saying is I would allow that sort of thing to happen. But anyway, so seeing as I don't have that, I would rather not.
Yeah. When I was a school teacher, I was not holding myself up as some paragon of deep wisdom or anything like that, but in the schools that I worked in, it did tend to be the case that I was about the only teacher that some of these students would ever encounter that was willing to, for example, defend something like capitalism, defend something like free trade, and say that socialism actually might not be a great idea. And being a science teacher, you don't get this as much in the United States, I'm not sure, but here in Australia, there's a very special place held in our curriculum, in the school curriculum, for Indigenous ways of learning and knowing and Indigenous ways of teaching. And so in the science curriculum, you will teach not only the Big Bang origin story of the universe, but you'll also pay lip service to what do the Indigenous Australians think about things, which, interesting though it might be as part of a religious studies course in mythology, they actually teach it in the science lesson. Not only that, they'll teach all sorts of other kind of pseudo-scientific nonsense supposedly is important for Australians to learn. And so, again, I was one of the few people that was willing to stand up and sort of critique these ideas as being nonsense. I think today, though, were I to do that, I'd probably get fired, or I'd probably get into a lot more trouble, because I was just lucky that I got on well with the students and no one really objected to me taking these contrarian views about a lot of the stuff that they were being taught. So in Australia, I think, I'm almost like the opposite to you. Just about everyone I know, because Australia is generally far more left leaning than what the United States seem to be. Well, certainly at the moment, politically, all over our news the last couple of days has been Trump's appearance at the UN, where he delivered his speech, and then a day later, our Prime Minister delivered a speech basically saying the exact opposite to everything that Trump said. We're doubling down on sort of investments in supposed renewables, and we're going to achieve net zero in the next 15 years. We're not going to wait until 2050. We're going to get net zero in the next 15 years. So all these sort of nonsense. Even though we're sitting on a bed of coal, we're going to build more windmills that are manufactured in China, and all that sort of nonsense. And so, but most Australians are on board with this. It's important to notice we only just elected this guy Prime Minister, and he seems to have quite a bit of support. So I'm swimming swimming in a sea of people politically that might be slightly different to your own. I feel like sometimes I'm not a far right person, but I feel like I'm the lone voice of basic conservative ideas at times, or libertarian leaning ideas. I'm surrounded by leftists.
You know what's funny is I would actually, and as far as all this goes, where I'm at right now, like if you go down the road where I live, anywhere, really in Florida or Georgia, you're going to pass a bunch of bumper stickers that are Trump stickers, but you're also going to pass a bunch of assault rifle looking stickers and stuff. This is all, and again, I have nothing, I'm a pro gun guy, all this kind of stuff, but I don't worship it in that way. Like these people really want to put it out there like I am this. So it's interesting to be in this. It's weird because I find myself mostly conservative on a lot of views. Technically, like the old school, like classical liberalism is what I sort of tend to be, which in a way, at the end of the day, kind of seems conservative. But people don't see it that way. They want to either be, again, there's a lot of radical style stuff going on, and it's all reactionary. It's like you have reaction, then you have another reaction, and I see it all the time. Even in the tech world right now, you have this neo-reactionaryism, which is like the idea that we don't even want democracy. We want now we want monarchy again, and they read like Jarvis, whatever his name, that Mencius Moldbug or whatever, I forget his name, Curtis Yarvin, and he wants monarchy, and people find these ideas intriguing that are really smart people, and I'm just like, yikes, that's weird. But again, I think that it's an emotional thing. I guess you could call it a theory. Which is like, I think they're reacting emotionally to it. And as we were saying earlier, it's like the thing about theories and all, if a theory is good, then it's good. You don't have to add any emotion to it. If it's bad, it's bad, and it will fall to the wayside eventually. It's sad that we see a lot of people adopt bad ideas, along the way. And I think it's because they want belonging. They want to be a part of something. And for people like you and myself, like we not to say that I'm some outlaw or something, but like I do feel like I'm on an island a lot, and it's weird. So that's kind of the good thing about, and I desire to be with people too. So it's cool to even communicate with you right now. But
I'll throw this to you. I'm interested in your take on this. So it just came to me now thinking about you talking about, and I've noticed it myself when I've been to the US, that people wear their political affiliation, well, a large number of people wear their political affiliation on their sleeve. So there's they will, that they're voting Republican, or that they're voting Democrat, and they'll put the things on the front lawn to indicate the way that they're voting. If they've got it, they'll put MAGA there. This simply doesn't happen in Australia. And so I think there's a flip side to this. On the one hand, you might very well say, oh, look at those, and this is, I think the average Australian would probably think this. Look at those Americans. They're all dogmatic in their adherence to their political affiliation. It's all about feelings and so on and so forth. We Australians aren't like that. But I think actually, to give you guys credit, I think that people there do come to a lot of their political affiliations via being able to actually engage in the argument and understand what the positions are that their party holds. That's something I don't think that we can say in Australia. I think that people are so disconnected. We don't put the flag on the front yard. We very rarely put up the sticker about who we're going to vote for, that kind of thing. But I think that one reason for that is a disinterest born of a lack of interest in trying to understand the policies and the principles and the theories and the explanations politically. So we're just sort of like, if the media, I think my impression is of my social group and people around me is, if the news media is telling us something, then that's the truth, and that's what will inform our next vote, kind of thing. But I think in America there's far more skepticism about the media, political parties, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, there definitely is. I mean, so in the blue collar world, and by the way, anytime I talk about this, it's just my experience. I'm not disparaging anything or anybody, but I have a thought on it. But I'll just do a description right now, which is something I notice is that conspiracy theories are very, very prominent in especially blue-collar America. And I think it's because whenever you have people that are very distant, like in California, say, or the very wealthy, this is so alien to anybody that they think, oh, well, they must be weirdos, or they must be this, or they must be, they cast aspersions on them, and they must be up to something. And then they create these, like, you know, these conspiracy theories. And this is very, people become dogmatic on these conspiracy theories. I actually have a very tough time talking with people because, as you said a moment ago, like, the reason it was brought to my mind, people are very skeptical of the news over here, but they're not healthily skeptical. They're paranoid skeptical. They're like, these people are trying to destroy us style thing. And it really causes an epistemological problem, because now we don't even, for instance, I might talk to somebody in a day. If I were to say, bring up 9/11 on the, 9/11 just passed, if I were to bring that up, you will have very differing views on 9/11, even though it was the most filmed thing ever. It's been the most, like, litigated thing. And yet people will still have these divergent views about it and who was involved and all this kind of stuff. And bin Laden might not even ever come up in these conversations. The terrorists won't even come up. The plane might not even come up. They might say it's a hologram. But I find that this is so, it is like, that's the one thing I like. As you said, like, the one thing that we in America have, which is great, is that we can express our views. And now there's a little bit of a chill in the air because of this late violence, and but I hope that people just keep going full hard with what they got to say, regardless of any of that, and stay strong. But yeah, like we have sadly we have an unhealthy skepticism, I feel like, of media. It's not born of rationalism, it's born of irrationalism, which is like, so people go to alternative media as if it's better. Like, and this actually I find is, this is something that's in the open society. He undid the idea of who should rule, and he replaced Popper undid, like, the idea of who should rule, and he replaced it with the idea of how do we make it to where our rulers don't destroy things, and, like, how can we correct errors, and with this is what I find with people. They always find, like, well, I'm going to go to these other people because they're way better and they're going to be really good at but sadly, they're just going to feed them what they want. And then there's no error correction happening within that sphere either. So it's like we're in this weird epistemological catastrophe at the moment. Or one could say that, or one could have a more optimistic view, but like, it's really hard to kind of grapple right now, and whenever I stick my finger in the air online and I look as what's going on, I'm just amazed with the vitriol and, like, the things that are said are just so terrible that people are saying to one another. But then I go outside, me and my family will go to Disney World, and everybody's completely fine. And I'm like, what is going on online? What, so it's I don't know. It's a weird.
There's a lot of competing echo chambers, and I think it's a lot of this can come down to entertainment, what people think are entertaining. Like when I'm in a mind of trying to explain the obsession that people have with doom scenarios and pessimism, and the latest one obviously is that AI is going to take over the world, and if it doesn't kill us all, it's going to render us completely useless. That kind of thing. That kind of doom. That thinking about that kind of doom. It's entertaining for people. It's like, it's a disaster movie. It's the Terminator. We're all going to be wiped out. And so if you can listen to a podcast where they're talking about the end times, I think it gives people a certain sort of thrill, and they think that they're in on some information that other people don't have. And I think that maybe, I don't know what you think about this, but my first encounter with any kind of conspiracy theoretic type thinking was like sort of the mid to late 90s when the X-Files was on. The X-Files was a big thing at the time. Television show about how this grand conspiracy was at work inside the government. There was a deep state of government inside the government that were hiding evidence of aliens, and the aliens were going to invade, and so they were keeping this from the human beings because most human beings would be wiped out and only some would be saved and all this kind of thing. But I remember watching that show and thinking, this is a great, that's well shot, well acted, the stories are intriguing, it's thrilling, but it's obviously complete and utter nonsense. There's no way that this could actually be true. And but I've always been attracted to that kind of show in the same way that, I like The Lord of the Rings, or I like Star Wars, suspension of disbelief for a little while. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to all make sense. You can just turn off your critical faculties somewhat in order to just go for the ride kind of thing. But people actually do think that the X-Files is something closer to a documentary than actually fiction, that they're really, like you guys over there in Congress are having hearings about, maybe the aliens really are there and they're being hidden as if someone wouldn't reveal. But that's only just, that's sort of a harmless kind of conspiracy theoretic thinking. But then there's, at the other end of the spectrum, the really dangerous stuff is, well, Israel is in charge of the United States and the Jews are running the world, this conspiracy. But not until much later, after I'd watched the X-Files, I realised, well, that kind of way of thinking about the world, it doesn't just seem to be a common, it's almost like the dominant way of thinking among large groups of people, that there is something being hidden from them. There are forces in control of the entire planet. And if you listen to this podcast or that podcast or read this blog or whatever, you'll be given the secret knowledge, and you too will find out how things are really working. But you've got this interest in conspiracy theoretic thinking. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like what examples you see are out there at the moment? What might be dangerous, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, well, I think that what you just said there, what can we do about it? I'll start there and then I'll sort of backtrack. I think that we need to recognize what good explanations and bad explanations are. Deutsch has the great thing of, like, a good explanation is an explanation that's hard to vary. So, for instance, the seasons, he uses this example in the beginning of Infinity. There was a time where we thought that the seasons were caused by, like, a god cries and then people get cold. But then what they didn't realize is, like, well, why in the heck is, like, 500 miles down south it's not cold, though? And then there's no explanation for that. And why is the sun going down at a different time and all this kind of stuff? So then somebody had a good explanation, which was that actually the Earth is circling the sun and it's on a tilted axis. Therefore, whenever it's facing one side of it, it's hot. When it's facing the other side, it's cold. And then the climate and all is caused by whatever is in the atmosphere. You have, like, very good explanations that you can't vary because it'll completely screw up the explanation. Whereas the God is crying explanation, you can vary because you can say, well, it's instead of Persephone or whatever the gods are, it's this other god, Hermes, or that's crying, and that's why. And nothing changes. People are like, oh yeah, okay, well that makes sense. People need to recognize immediately when they see an explanation, we should stop wasting our time with bad explanations. For instance, the idea that aliens are visiting here, we need to look at that and say to ourselves, well, first of all, as you said, Brett, like, wouldn't that have already been exposed? Why are they only going to cornfields where nobody is? How is it that there's 8 billion phones on this planet? Nobody's captured these individuals or these creatures or their aircrafts, a clear picture of them. How we live in a remote part of the universe. Every part of the universe is remote, technically, because, it takes light years to get anywhere. How would they have gotten here? How would that, wouldn't we have noticed them coming? All of this kind of stuff. And we should notice right off the bat that this is a bad explanation. You know what it probably is? It's probably China that sent something over here. It's not breaking the laws of physics, because if it were, that in itself it would escape somebody's mouth at some point in the past. They would have been like, "Hey, did you hear what happened? I went faster than the speed of light the other day," and then they would have told that to their partner in bed, and then that would have been a thing. So, like, instead, we waste our time with, as you said, like, these congressional hearings where we're having to hear people, and then it's titillating to the audience, and everybody's like, it makes it seem like this is even worth looking into, whereas in the first place, it was a bad explanation. We shouldn't even have wasted our time. And actually, Deutsch points this out in his book, whereas, like, some explanations follow all of the, he points this out in the beginning of Infinity. Some explanations actually follow, like, a lot of rules to, like, looking into things. For instance, they might even obey Occam's razor, and they're a guess, they're a theory. but they're not worth looking into. It doesn't matter, because like from the very outset, we should just notice that. And it doesn't matter if they're following these other things. Are they a good explanation or not? So that's one. Number two, though, if we backtrack, it is something I have noticed is when people, I think that we as humans we're explainers, so we want to explain the world. And we notice this in history. That's how we even got science. Science, I would assume, actually, Popper explains this in one of his books. He has a good explanation of how knowledge began, which is it started with tradition, and it started with rules of thumb. And it was people trying to explain the world by talking about gods and all, until they had another theory that crept up and overshadowed that theory. But the problem is that whole gods thing, even though that's a bad explanation, it never fell by the wayside. Like in Darwinism, for instance, like an animal would just die if it's not doing its job. The weird thing about memes, which are like the cultural, like the idea that you're replicators within culture or whatever. Backwards hats is one, music is one, so and bad ideas are another one. So the weird thing about bad ideas is they can actually stay instantiated throughout the course of time, and they won't die. And it's because they're not built to. Their ideas aren't built to be good. They're replicators. So they're surviving because they're memes. You know what I mean? And the problem is that we, again, going back to this idea of good explanations and epistemology, I would hope that society would get better at trying to get better at epistemology, basically. I think the problem is that the word epistemology in general puts people to sleep. So so we need to learn better ideas. And I think Deutsch's book is a great way of getting people into it, because he says things in his book that are just so captivating. Like he'll say something like, if you were to get hit by a quasar that's within 10 billion light years or whatever, or he goes, and there's like lead between you and that, the neutrinos alone will still kill you or whatever, and you're like amazed. Like he writes this amazing stuff, and you're amazed by that, and that's what captivates the mind. But I feel like there's just a lot of books out there, like reading
my favorite line, which is almost like a stand-up routine that David did in one of his TED Talks. It's where he got the biggest laugh, and he was explaining the concept of the quasar, and he said trying to understand or trying to give a sense of what it would like to be in one of those jets almost defies human language. But it would be something like experiencing a supernova blast, but at point blank range and for millions of years at a time. Everyone cracks up. Yeah, it's great. But it's fantastic.
So whenever somebody that's the one thing about David that he's talented at, is he can say something like that, and it's so mind-blowing that you're immediately captivated. That's the problem with that's why David is so vital to the Popper's ideas, is because Popper is, on the other hand, very dry. When you read Popper, you got to be a Popperian to really love Popper. I mean, and I love it, and I like buzz when I read Popper. It's like I get a buzz off of it. But most people look at the Open Society, and the moment it says Plato, they're like, oh my God, what? I don't want to read about Plato or friggin' Aristotle. So they completely tune out immediately. And so hopefully we have, I guess I'll get to the solution, which is we can get to good epistemology, and maybe through the Conjecture Institute with what you're doing, Brett, podcasts, all these kind of things will just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and hopefully get people in the mode of critical rationalism, which is the idea of let's correct errors, let's discuss things, let's let our theories die instead of us, and so that's the goal. But yeah, as far as conspiracy theories go, there's a lot of them right now, and it's always disheartening whenever I see new ones pop up that are obviously wrong on their face.
Yeah, the other thing to say on that, UFOs is a case in point, but the fact is, not only is it a bad explanation just to assume that the thing that you're looking at must be evidence of an alien having crossed the galaxy, but also, and what Popper teaches and what David Deutsch, of course, teaches as well, is that you're observing. Seeing is not believing. Observation is hard. Like a scientist designing an experiment can spend weeks, months, years devising an experiment to do just so they can make observations which are very difficult to interpret. And so if you're looking at like some radar image or some photograph or video and you think, oh, I'm just seeing a thing. In fact, it can be very, very difficult to know what you're looking at. We all have the experience, and David has this in his book, and I use it all the time, of like the sky at night, you look up and you see the stars up there, but you're not seeing what a star really is. You're seeing this tiny, cold, twinkling little thing that seems not that far away, but in fact, it can be thousands of light years away, and it's super hot and it's super huge, but you're not going to get that by looking ever more closely or repeating your observations, that kind of thing. And that works as much for stars as it does for objects that have supposedly crossed the galaxy and are now, kidnapping people in the south part of America.
Yeah, there's and sadly, like I said, the one thing that's good about again David's work and Karl Popper and everybody your work is that it's spreading epistemological ideas and how to think about things. Whereas you have scientists and great communicators like Richard Dawkins, who I love all of Richard Dawkins' work. I own every one of his books except one that I can think of, and it's one of the ones where it's just all the forewords to other books that he wrote. But and I've read almost everything he's ever written. I absolutely love it. And it's all vital. But the problem is the starting point of all those books are more of a surface level. You're just it's very. Oh, so there's evolution, therefore there's no God, or there's, but it doesn't. There's no depth to it. Whereas, there's never the point of like, and actually, Dawkins wrestles with this in his books. He always wrestles with the idea that people say it's just a theory, and I would say to Dawkins, it is just a theory. Let's stop even arguing about that. We don't have to even worry about that anymore. Just say yes, it's just a theory, but it's also true, because if you follow the logic or the work of like Alfred Tarski, which is what Popper puts forward, it's just whatever is corresponding to the facts. And as far as we can tell, Neo-Darwinism corresponds to the facts. And as of right now, it's true. Now, can we say it's certainly true? No. And we'll never be able to say it's certainly true. But let's be okay with that, and let's just be honest about it, instead of saying, always combating people with, we combat dogmatism with dogmatism. We say, the people say there is a God and evolution is wrong, and say, no, evolution is a fact, and then they argue about this whole thing. I'm like, well, no, it's a guess, it's a conjecture. But I'll be honest with you, I haven't seen one that's beat it yet, and that's all I have to worry about. And it doesn't matter what these people say. So, as you said earlier, just saying something is not refuting something and saying, oh, well, that's not wrong. That's not an explanation. You got to offer something at that point, and nobody's done so thus far. But so yeah, you have all these great thinkers that they offer like surface. Even Steven Pinker, who I love, but also he's a big purveyor of Bayesianism. I think he doesn't explicitly make the distinction between what David Deutsch would call Bayesian epistemology, which is just induction, and Bayesianism, which is just using Bayes' theorem, which that's actually perfectly valid. Like, you can. But instead people use these credence ideas of like, my theory, I believe my theory is better. It's gone up 30% now because I have more evidence accumulated. That's induction. That's all that is. I mean, it's inductive reasoning, and it's your theory is exactly the same. The question we're trying to see is it good? But
some of these great intellectual heroes of mine as well, and I admire these people, Dawkins and Pinker and various others. They will often denigrate philosophy. They'll say, well, you don't need philosophy. Philosophy is nonsense. You just need a scientific, rational perspective on the world, which of course itself is a philosophy. But they get trapped or they get stuck in either Bayesianism or in trying to figure out how to conjure the language such that evolution by natural selection isn't just a theory or something like that. And so they get wound up into these knots. And my diagnosis is, well, if only you actually saw value in philosophy, not just philosophy randomly, but, you know, Popperian philosophy, you could actually have all the good stuff that you've written about, you know, Pinker's case, the Enlightenment and how we've improved, better angels of our nature and all that, and Dawkins' ideas about biology, all of which are perfectly excellent, building upon Charles Darwin. But he could win the argument so much better if he had the tools of Popperian epistemology to help him out. Now, coming out of that, you're writing a book on Popperian epistemology. Can you give me a little bit of an insight? You know, what are you thinking about including in it? How far along are you? What's your process in writing?
Right now, I am only on the Charles Darwin piece, and I'm so my initial goal was to read for an entire year everything that I could, and then start writing. The problem is like with how my life is I'm reading and writing, which is what's killing my my momentum, because I don't know about you, Brett, but I'll try to write a paragraph, but then I feel the need to read an entire book just to write one paragraph sometimes to make sure I'm covering all my bases. And Jeremy assured me the other day, he told me, he goes, listen, you're never going to this is never going to be perfect. He goes, just write. He goes, and then if you find anything extra along the way, make that the second book. He goes, so don't worry about that. So he actually helped me there. But right now, though, I'm working on Charles Darwin, and my goal with working on a brief biography of his life, which actually is going to take up 3 chapters and set in segments, is exploring all of the theories that Darwin came across while he was growing up. This is not a normal biography. I'm not doing about his relationship with or his wife, or this isn't about his parents. It mentions all those things, just his background, but like this is all about his ideas and his thinking. And the thing that I found interesting about studying Darwin is how unspecial he was in so many ways. He was a normal kid. The weird thing about it is he had passion, and his passion was for naturalism. He loved collecting bugs. He didn't even know anything about bugs. He just liked bugs, and he loved fishing, hunting, and he happened to be raised in Shrewsbury, which is like this gorgeous part of England, and it's still gorgeous to this day, and it's beautiful looking. He was terrible at school. He went to Shrewsbury School, didn't do well. Ironically, they have a statue of him in front of the old school now, and it's funny because they make it seem like, oh, he was this brilliant mind there. He was not. He was not. He was just a normal guy, but they want to celebrate him, obviously, because he changed the world with this philosophy of his, or his scientific theory, which it is philosophical. And that's my goal, though, is just to show how ununique this individual was. But he encountered, through his passion, very unique ideas. For instance, he encountered the ideas of Charles Babbage, who was basically, Charles Babbage created the difference engine, or the analytical engine, and like the precursor to computers and the precursor to AI, and he encountered William Whewell, who actually was sort of a precursor to Karl Popper. He even put the idea out there that all observations are theory laden, even using this type of thinking. Although he was wrong about, he used a lot of Kantian. Whewell was very Kantian in the sense that he thought that we had things in our brain that were like categorized to different things, like where Kant was very much like this. Popper did away with all that. And so this is my idea, is to just put all this out there, and then I'm going to do the likewise with Karl Popper, and I'm reading several biographies on him right now. There's only maybe 3 that are viable, like good, or at least to me. Karl Popper, likewise, he was definitely more precocious than Darwin. He was very much he was very intellectual from the get-go. He also ran into a bunch of bad ideas that he thought were good at the time. Like he was a communist for a hot minute, in his like early years, and then he obviously ran into the brick wall of communism, which is just a catastrophe of an ideology, and And so basically my point is to show all of the theories that these guys had run against, how it is that these particular individuals came up with their theories that happen to be very similar. And Popper noticed this, and he melded his a little bit with Darwinism, but ultimately they had passion, and they were trying to explain the world. And I think that that's the two things that are important about those guys. They cared about reality, and whereas there are a lot of people out there that there's scientists that only care about predictions. They only care about, they're instrumentalists. And Darwin was never like that. Popper was obviously never like that. And then, so basically I'm trying to highlight all of these things, and hopefully I can have the last part of it is put it into a nice mold, which will be helpful for everybody who cares about knowing true, or trying to find true theories. And there's no end goal to any of this. As you and I know, the world of knowledge is it's unending. There is even if you lived in a box or cube that was finite, you would still never be able to say I've explored every part of this cube, because you simply wouldn't know. And I feel like as if that's how the world that we live in right now, which is, and I just want to show that within this work. That's my ultimate goal, I think.
Awesome. I don't know if you know. Oh, you're not on X. You're not on Twitter, so you wouldn't know this. But I woke up to good news today. There were two things actually when I flipped on social media. One was David Deutsch had a brief encounter with Sam Altman that they published. Sam Altman was getting an award somewhere, so they had a little bit of a chat. And then Sam Altman said The Beginning of Infinity was his favourite book ever. So that was a great endorsement. And then the other was, I don't know if you know Judea Karl, the philosopher and computer scientist. He wrote The Book of Why. Well, he tweeted out his, and I'll read the tweet for you. He said, quote, "I am delighted to learn about the creation of the Conjecture Institute, whose mission is to fund fundamental research across many domains, including physics, epistemology, and AGI. A detailed description of their mission can be found in the interview that we did on Conjecture Institute's website with David Deutsch, who is scientific advisor to the Institute. To learn more about the Conjecture Institute and its activities, I've followed their account on X." And he then goes on to say, "I encourage you to follow them if you have an interest in improving our understanding of concepts such as culture, worldview, evidence, knowledge, and understanding." And so, end quote. That was great ringing endorsement from Judea Pearl for all the work that Conjecture Institute is doing. Yeah, so hopefully only bigger and better things from here on in. And you're kind of unique, one of the fellows at the Conjecture Institute, because as you say, you're not deep into the pure physics research. You're not a mathematician as such. You're working on epistemology and outreach about the Popperian worldview, which is just so important to do, because the number of people who've read Popper is very small, but that small number can have an outsized effect on culture if the memes were to spread, these better memes about memes and about explanations were to spread. So are there any final thoughts you have or ideas you have either about the Conjecture Institute and the kind of the good work that they're doing, and or your interest before we let you go?
I would say about that, yeah, it's interesting because I myself, again, I am not a physicist, I'm not a mathematician, all that stuff. I am often within these Discord chats with all the fellows, though, and I will tell everybody that I am aghast at how the pace with which these people are working and how much they're doing at one time right now. They're creating all these videos and like all these like genuinely crazy experiments they're trying to raise money for that are being oversaw by like Chiara Marletto and like obviously David Deutsch and all. And it's just I'm just amazed within the short amount of time that I've been a part of it, all of the work that these people are doing. My only goal is to make it, hopefully make it, if people if they fall into my camp at all, make it understandable to them. And even though I myself am not I don't understand a lot of math or anything like that. But then again, this is my whole point. Neither did Darwin. and none of these people that wanted to explain the world didn't know jack squat about any of that, but they were able to do it because they were looking for good explanations, and they were able to they would stand in the fold and get criticized and have their stuff criticized and change their mind and not change their mind, or whatever the case may be. And hopefully that's my mission with it. But I will say to everybody that whether or not you see the Conjecture Institute doing stuff or not, there's a lot of stuff going on there that I'm always amazed at every single day, and I just simply am looking forward to what they got going on myself. So Judea Pearl, like that's a ringing endorsement. I think that's cool, and hopefully that just continues to expand, I would say. Yeah.
Well, obviously we're only at the beginning, and that was just notable because he's one of the first sort of big names, aside from Deutsch himself, that have come across the Conjecture Institute, realised that good work is being done here in a really interesting way, and especially from the Popperian perspective, which is lacking. And so the people who want to work with Conjecture Institute don't have to go through the usual hurdles of trying to apply for funding and that kind of thing, or justifying what work they do. It's non-coercive, as you said earlier. It's more, it can tend to foster more creativity in that way as well. Well, thanks so much, Eric, for talking to me today and for talking to Conjecture Institute. We hope that we hear more of your episodes of the Falsifiable Podcast, and one day in the future we'll have some access to your book. It sounds like you're writing more than one book at the moment. You've got a Substack. Can you tell us any final thoughts that you have and where people can find you, of course?
You can find, just look up Eric Denton Falsifiable Podcast. It'll pop up on Google, and also the Falsifiable newsletter. I write there sometimes, and those are more just like everyday thoughts, but they tend to have to do with what's going on in the world. So that's I would just search that, and if you like it, that's cool. If not, then it's not your flavor, then that's okay too.
And we should say to everyone as well that if you like the sound of what Eric is working on, then go to the Conjecture Institute, conjectureinstitute.org, and obviously the link will appear at the end of this episode. And if you want to support Eric in particular, the links will be there. Again, thanks so much for your time, Eric, and I'll head off to bed now, and you'll just be beginning your day.
Oh, let me say this final thing. Brett, I did not realize how late it is there. It's like 2 a.m. there or something, or is it
coming up to 3?
It's coming up to 3 in the morning. So everybody listening to this, thank you, Brett, for doing this and making this work, because living in Australia and talking to all of us Americans is extremely difficult. So
I'm on the night shift. I'm doing a Doom Debates podcast, I think, that doesn't start until 3 a.m. It's going to go from 3 to 6 or something or other. So I'm doing someone else's podcast. That's on Monday. So I'm getting myself in. That's happening on Monday, and between now and then, of course, Ratfest, and I'll be dialing into Ratfest to deliver a talk as well. So that's also going to be early in the morning. But I'm fine with it,
And everybody support Brett, because it's very difficult doing this stuff. It might not seem like people they're just talking. It takes many hours sometimes to put these things together where they're actually valuable. So I completely understand it. Thank you.
Very kind of you, Eric. Labor of love, of course. Yeah. Until next time, I'll let you go, Eric. See you later.